Hello, and welcome to World Civilizations 1. We are studying the beginning of time of written history until the 1500s. We are on chapter 10 this week, and we are discussing the Roman city-state to empire. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started on our PowerPoint, and we will get started. Pull it up here. Put myself. Okay, here we go. Chapter 10, Rome from city-state to empire. This is a tomb engraving, and they're showing in different tomb engravings in your chapter 10, it talks about, there's some beautiful things that were written. If we get a moment, maybe I'll read some of them to you. In the textbook, tributes to wives that were lost, to husbands that were lost, to children that were lost to death and passed away. And it really, our chapter opens up talking about how the familial love was very much like it is today. Yes, there were issues. Yes, there were not, the women's rights were not at all what they are today or equal. And but there were some signs of loving families, and especially in epitaphs and the tombs inscriptions. And make sure you read those. So those are amazing, and hopefully we'll get to read one. Here we have the chronology. Etruscans, rule from Rome. Rome Republic, conquest of Italy. The First and Second Punic Wars. Hannibal is amazing. I will probably put a link to just watch just a little snippet of the Hannibal story. Hannibal is an incredible person in history. His father, he was from Carthage. It's the northern part of Africa. They were actually Phoenicians, so they're actually from Lebanon, and they sailed all around it and settled the Mediterranean. So Hannibal's father tried to beat Rome. They were fighting over Sicily, and Rome won in the First Punic War. The Second Punic War, Hannibal was hell-bent on revenge. Now, revenge is not something that that is not a good thing that we advocate, but this revenge in history makes for an amazing story. So instead of coming to Rome through the bottom of the boot, Italy shaped like a boot, Hannibal is very brilliant tactician, and he decides to go through, cross the Straits of Gibraltar, crossing Spain, crossing the Pyrenees, crossing the Alps, and coming down and sacking Rome from the top of the boot. And he nearly did. And there's a kicker too. He took 30 to 40 elephants with him. And now elephants weren't just elephants. Elephants were like fighting machines, like death machines, like tanks, stomping people, armor. And he crossed the Pyrenees Mountains and the Alps and all that snow and came down and used them to attack. Now, what happened was Scipio, the general for Rome, decided to sack his home to attack Carthage. And when Hannibal was attacking Rome. So when Hannibal heard, he went home, and that is why he lost. It was very, very close. Okay, so we have the Etruscans are the first ones that are, at Rome, and they were the first inhabitants of Rome. They lived in small city-states. The Etruscan Federation ruled the Romans. There are some thoughts, and your book actually talks about possibly that there were groups of people from Troy, from the Trojan War when they lost, that they came down from Troy and also started the Roman civilization. Greeks colonized southern Italy. Phoenicians via Carthage and the naval power. So Phoenicians were spreading out all over. Remember we learned last week that Phoenicians originally come from Lebanon, but then they, really are on the whole rim of the Mediterranean. Okay, there you can see how Italy looks like a boot. And then Sicily looks like the soccer ball. Okay, and then you have Sardinia and Corsica are two other islands. So that's what the Carthaginians were fighting over with Italy. Okay, the Italian peninsula was invaded in New World times in history. The native Italic people of the north and center were taken over by more civilized Etruscans in the 10th to 8th centuries BCE. Rome was probably founded by the uniting of several villages under a single government in the 8th century, as Roman legend states. Founding Rome, of course, you know the myth. Romulus and Remus, the twin brothers, founded it. And there was in your book a picture of, I wish I had it in here, a picture of the she-wolf with the two babies underneath, Romulus and Remus. And actually, we have that same statue in Eden Park in Cincinnati. Rome is called the City of Seven Hills, and so is Cincinnati. So, interesting. Okay, 7 agrarian villages joined together. They set up res publica, or the Latin for a republic, state without a monarch. Okay, Republican government, we have the Senate. They're made up of patricians, 5 to 10% of the population. They're the wealthier, well-educated General Assembly. You have the plebeians. You have 2 consuls, censors, originally tax assessors, and then you have tribunes with power of speak act in the name of commoners. Equal voting rights. The Hortensian Law is super important because it's where it gave patricians and plebeians equal voting rights, even though they didn't always get it. At least there was a law in place, and those are some, we took a lot from the laws of the Romans, the Justinian Law, as well as the Hortensian Law, but that's where it started. No real equal access to government for all, though. It's kind of just in writing, not in action. Rome led federation of tribes in Latium. Rome won the control of the Italian peninsula. Rome had a generous policy toward the defeated, offered partial to full citizenship if subject people remained loyal and supported the troops when needed. Citizenship offered many protections. Citizenship in Rome was a big deal, okay? And maybe later on you'll notice, even in the biblical sense, because we're going to talk more about Christianity in Rome next week, but Paul, the Apostle Paul in the Bible, was a citizen of Rome and therefore had to have a fair trial. There were different protections if you were a citizen, and sometimes you paid to be a citizen. Sometimes you did different things so that you could be, because there were so many extra things to take care of you. Subjects integrated, adopted Latin, intermarried with Romans, and remained loyal. Punic Wars, we already talked about. This is Hannibal and his legacy. Intermittent conflict between Rome and Carthage began over dispute of Sicily. Hannibal, Carthaginian, ravaged Italy, won every battle, but lost the war. Rome defeated Carthage at Zama, and Rome gained land in Spain and France. Once it defeated Carthage, it completely leveled Carthage because Rome was not used to being conquered. So when you almost conquer Rome, they're going to punish you pretty bad, and they destroyed his home. Rome next moved east and defeated some Hellenistic kingdoms. Controversy about Rome's future rose in the Senate. Conservatives wanted Rome to remain a homogeneous republic. Imperialists wanted Rome to expand and gain wealth. Rome's victorious citizen soldier army began to change. Early ancient Rome, you could only be a soldier if you owned land, because you could only bear arms if you owned land. So then it began to open up. There was a proconsul who said, we need more volunteer soldiers. So they began to give very, very poor people land so that they could be soldiers, and expanded the army that way. Conquest of the East. Rome's empire was created not by a plan, but a series of wars that had little or no relation to another. Rome's influences were permanently barred from Central Europe after the massive defeat in I can't see, it's a very tiny word, Teutoburg Forest, the German forest. I was just talking about that with a student this morning in 9 CE. And establishment of the Rhine and Danube borders thereafter. In Asia, the Romans created a series of client kingdoms that relieved them of having stationed large numbers of troops there. Crisis in the late Republic, economic and social displacement. The plebeian citizen soldiers lost land to wealthy who owned great estates run by slaves. The landless peasants now flocked to the cities. Proletariat is one of our history analysis words. People dependent solely on daily wages, ready to follow any general politician that would lead them. Marius, army reform. So he was a former consul, re-elected for 6 terms, recognized need for reform, abolished property qualifications to join the army, which opened up a huge swath of people who could have land. And I was just telling you that, I think a few minutes ago. But Marius didn't care so much for the Roman Empire. He did this more so these soldiers would follow him personally, which he staged a coup and took over, of course. All right. Army became a base for opportunism and instability. Soldiers promised pensions and land upon retirement. Sulla, harsh soldier consul, became dictator. Triumvirates. These are really interesting. The first triumvirate. The Senate was corrupt and unable to solve Rome's problems. Leaders tried to wield power with republican framework. Julius Caesar and the first triumvirate. The first triumvirate was Julius Caesar, Crassus, and Pompey. I believe maybe it's chapter 12, you'll find out that this amazing tactic, the Parthian shot, is what was used to kill Crassus. And we'll go deeper into that. So Crassus was killed in battle. Pompey and Julius Caesar kind of got into a scuffle over power. Pompey went to Egypt, and Pompey was trying to hide in Egypt, and Ptolemy, Cleopatra's brother, cut his head off because he thought that's what Julius Caesar wanted him to do. But you never ever cut the head off of somebody that's Roman. You're not supposed to do that. So Julius Caesar was very upset. All right. And of course, Julius Caesar was assassinated 23 times he was stabbed. The significance of that is when he was in Egypt, supposedly he met Cleopatra. If you ever get a chance to watch the Cleopatra movie with Elizabeth, cannot think of her name right now. She was an amazing Cleopatra. But Julius Caesar supposedly met her rolled up in a rug because there was a civil war between Ptolemy and Cleopatra. They were brother and sister, and they were also married. And they were fighting over the throne. So supposedly she was brought in a rug as a gift. And when he unrolled the rug, he saw her, met her, fell in love with her or something. And they began a relationship even though Julius Caesar had a wife in Rome. So they had a baby together, Julius Caesar and Cleopatra, and his name was Caesarion. Supposedly, Julius Caesar was delivered by cesarean section. Don't really know if it's true, but that is out there in the history world. And there were cesarean sections actually performed, but usually it was on a dead mother. So if a mother died, they would cut open to get the baby, to save the baby. So anyway, Cleopatra goes back to Rome. Julius Caesar is there. He has a wife, and then he has married Cleopatra as well. And if you ever get to see Cleopatra with Elizabeth Taylor in it, she comes in this huge parade, pomp and circumstance, and she has her son Caesarion, that's supposed to be Julius Caesar's, and she hands him, presents him to him, and he embraces him, saying he's my son. And Julius Caesar, definitely, was a decent emperor, but with Cleopatra really wanted to take over the world and kind of really tried to sway him in that, pathway. So then you see, and if you watch the movie, you see this as well, he begins to wear purple, which means that he's like emperor for life, and that he wants to, that's royalty color. The purple is a royalty color, and, having his name Julius Caesar and then having a child named Caesarion, that sort of thing, it's looking like he wants some sort of a monarchy and kingdom. And so the Senate gets very nervous, and they decide they need to stop him. And they really, really, really don't like Cleopatra because she's from Egypt, and Egyptians were supposed to be kind of weird, kind of different, kind of way too mystical, and kind of like trash compared to a Roman citizen. So they were worried about that as well. So the story goes he was stabbed 23 times on the Ides of March. The Ides of any month is March the 5th. I'm sorry, March the 15th. And so there's supposed to be a soothsayer that says to him at the beginning of March, beware of the Ides of March. And then his wife, his Roman wife, I believe her name was Julia, says to him, don't go to the Senate tomorrow. I had a terrible dream that you're going to die. And then he goes and he dies. Mark Antony was his best friend, but they locked him out and he was unable to get there. Now, why did they stab him 23 times? This is really a great question because think about it. If one senator stabbed him, then they know he killed him. But when 23 do it at the same time, nobody knows who deals the fateful blow. And so it's kind of like a team effort, a group project with no guilt. So just something to think about. Okay, Octavian, adopted son of Caesar, takes over for Caesar, but they have a second triumvirate, which is with Mark Antony, Lepidus, and Octavian. Crushed assassins and divided the empire. Then there was a war with Antony. Antony hooks up with Cleopatra again. He listens to her advice, and her advice is not good. And then finally, he has the fateful battle in Actium, and it's the beginning of the Roman Empire. Triumvirates. The picture shows a bronze figure of a Roman legionary in full dress at the time of the empire in the 2nd century. The soldier's vest is constructed of overlapping metal bands that, although heavy and awkward, effectively protect him from the enemy's thrusts. The Augustan age. Reforms of Octavian Augustus. He retained the form of the republic while yielding all the power. Offices and titles. Pontifex Maximus, high priest. Octavian accepted the title of Augustus, which means revered one. Preferred to be called the princeps or first citizen. Government was called the principate, and head of state, consul for life. The Augustan age, imperial policies. He provided dole of grain and oil to address urban poverty and unrest. Expanded public works. So that was kind of like a welfare system if they couldn't eat, if they were starving, so that like citizens, if they couldn't feed themselves due to work changes. The Navy patrolled the rivers to wipe out piracy. The Praetorian Guard, loyal to Augustus, only armed force in Italy. No one else was allowed to bring their legions in Italy. The Augustan age, peace and prosperity, Pax Romana, is the Roman peace. 2 centuries of peace, law, and order in the empire. Literature and art flourish. Safety, trade networks, prosperity. Augustus made Tiberius his son-in-law the successor. Imperial unification. Roman culture spread. Latin and Greek used throughout the empire. Okay. Roman aqueduct in Spain. What is really cool is they used the legions and the soldiers to build things in times of peace, which is amazing. This modern photo shows the enduring nature of Roman civic architecture all around the Mediterranean basin. This aqueduct could still be employed by the citizens of Segovia, Spain, to bring fresh water to them. Similar structures survive in southern France and Turkey. Rome's presence in the world. The Roman Empire dominated the Mediterranean Sea. Rome grew rich from tribute and trade. The empire imported goods from Asia, silks, spices, China, pepper, cardamom, ginger, India, turmeric, saffron, cinnamon, nutmeg, cloves, Southeast Asia. And then, of course, we have the trade routes, Silk Road and the Indian Ocean. Roman law, one of the greatest lasting Roman achievements. Many of their laws we have borrowed today. Basic principles, co-equal to letter of the law, equity, fairness, interpretation is crucial. Law of the peoples, Laus Gentium, natural law. Arts and literature followed Greek models. Cicero, Terence, Cato, Lucretius, Virgil. He wrote the Aeneid, epic of founding of Rome. Historians Caesar, Polybus, Tacitus, poets Ovid, Horace, and Catullus. Sculpture. Many Romans copies of Greek sculpture survived. Romans developed realistic style, best popular in architecture. You still have the Forum and the Colosseum. And I got to go to Rome 14 years ago, and it was magical. Colosseum was fantastic. I have to tell you the story because I always tell it when I'm teaching. So I'm standing in the middle of the Roman Colosseum, and you have these little headphones on, and your guide is talking to you. And as I'm standing there, she begins to tell a story that they used to fill the Colosseum with water and then have like reenact a Navy battle that everyone knew about. So it would be like a movie, an action movie, except the only problem is people are really dying. There's real death. You know, there's gladiators on this ship, and that's the ship that's supposed to win. And then they attack another ship, and it's real death, and it's full of thousands of people. And that was just amazing to me. Also being able to, you know, see the basement and go kind of where you can like look down the corridor of the basement of the Colosseum. That's where, you know, they had the animals, they held animals that they would pit up against gladiators, and also where they fed different groups of people, including Christians, to the lions. So that was just, you know, very sobering to just, you know what I know about history and to be in that space. And it was incredible. Okay. The Roman preference for realism in their pictorial arts is shown by this bust of a man assumed to be the Emperor Macron. Although their techniques were generally dependent on classical Greek models, the Romans soon progressed beyond the desire of merely to imitate. Roman beliefs, we talked about Stoics and Stoicism. Marcus Aurelius, last of the good emperors, 5 good emperors. He wrote Meditations, a book called Meditations, which is still in circulation today. Seneca, all humanity shares a divine spark. Each one should be valued. Religions, civic religions, stress duty to state and family, involved mutual promises, gods, people. They still believed in the, you know, Jupiter, Zeus, Apollo, Neptune, Poseidon, Venus, Aphrodite, Minerva, Athena, Ares, and Mars. So they borrowed heavily from the Greek gods and goddesses and just kind of changed their names. Right, popularity of the mystery religions. Farming. Most of the land was owned by the government or wealthy absentee landlords. Small farmers could not compete. Many moved to the cities. Okay, so we want to talk about slavery, and this is where slavery really gets to be more sinister. Things are changing. Increases of slaves due to conquest. Slaves often better educated, more highly skilled than masters. Slaves used on plantations, in mines, and on ships. And that we need to stop for a minute, because when you're in a silver mine, your life expectancy is from 5 to 7 years because they work you to death. So there was this free labor where it was just like, let's work them till they die. They don't mean anything. Also in your chapter, you will see that that if you raped a slave before, you would be in trouble. Okay, and now it no longer mattered if you raped a slave. No longer matter if they were in the mines and dying. And then ships, galley ships. If you watch the movie Ben-Hur, I wish I could put a clip in here. I cannot do that, or they flag me on YouTube. But maybe I'll do that for class. There is the galleys. They're big boats with oars underneath. Well, those men underneath those huge galley ships, they're usually slaves, and they were chained to their benches. They would sleep there. They would eat there. They would go to the bathroom there, and they would have them row their ships and their navies until they were dead, and then they would, you know, throw them overboard. If the ship went down, you're chained. You're dead. If the ship encounters another ship and those soldiers from the opposing side come over, they'll kill you to stop the ship. So that was a problem. The second problem was slavery was never hereditary, and all of a sudden it's starting to be. At the end of the ancient Greek society, at the end of the ancient Roman society, you could be born into slavery where before you couldn't. It was harder to be free. They were starting to use the poor, criminals, debtors, conquered people to really build their empire. Because they seem to be expendable lives. You don't see any racial slavery. That's later. But you can start to see this sinister kind of twist to it, where they're no longer human beings. Okay. Some people sold themselves into slavery to avoid taxes. Wow. This model has been reconstructed. This is a Roman apartment from an archaeological evidence found in Ostia, Rome's port. The building on the right is the home of a wealthy family, possibly the owner of multi-story tenement to the left. Although some tenements were solidly built, many were thrown up to maximize the income for the landlord and allowed to become filthy nests. Gross. Very gross. Gender relations. Patria potestas was really kind of an entrenchment of patriarchy, which is one of our history analysis words. Authority of the father over the family, over daughters, could execute family members. Women were starting to be regarded as property. Father power exceeded the husband's. Marriage arrangements, divorces were common. As you read this chapter, there were two things that you could penalty of death in Rome. One was if you raped a free woman. It didn't matter if you raped a slave, because that's a slave. But if you raped a free woman, you could get the penalty of death. And if you were a woman and you committed adultery, not if you were a man. So you have this double standard beginning, very entrenched in the Roman times. Abortion was legal until the 1st century. Women worked in most trades. Women not as segregated as in Greece. In Greece, remember, they had like 2 rooms that they could be in. And, you know, women could be educated and they could have many more jobs were available to them. Children in education, patrician males received an excellent education. Okay. There was a really sad part in your book that talked about if a family had, if a family had a daughter and they wanted a son, sometimes they would take them to the garbage dump and lay them there. And people would pick them up and raise these girls to be prostitutes, which, wow, that's heavy. This tender rendition of a young girl daydreaming over her studies is marked by a sentiment not often encountered in Roman painting. So women could be educated. I mean, that is something that a lot of other cultures did not really accept. In the beginning of the United States, when we were colonies, and even later, women were not really allowed to be educated, especially not in college or have a career or job. Later, they were so that they could read the Bible more, so they could teach their own children. But in Rome, it was okay to be an educated woman. All right. Okay, so I think that is it for chapter 10. And I do want to put some links because there's some really interesting stuff. I do want to tell you about Ben-Hur for a moment. The writer of Ben-Hur, which is, it's one of my favorite movies. There's two different Ben-Hurs. There's an older one with Charlton Heston, and then there's a newer one. And Ben-Hur is an incredible story, and it was written by someone from Indiana. His name was Lew Wallace, and he was a general, I believe a general in the Civil War, and he was given the post to protect Cincinnati. And so I was able to go over to, there was a little fort in northern Kentucky with my oldest son, and it was so awesome. We were actually doing an archaeology dig, and we were like, you know, taking the screens and looking for buttons and for, you know, Civil War buttons and different silverware we found, buttons, what else did we find? Bullets. And that's where Lew Wallace was stationed. So he put everyone on martial law in Cincinnati because they really believed that the South was going to come up and take over Cincinnati and take control of it. So he was given the job to protect it. He did protect it. Cincinnati was not taken by the South, by the Confederates. But what an amazing story. And then he wrote this book, Ben-Hur, and it is incredible. Just an incredible story of history, and I just love it. It has triremes in it. It has the galleys. It has the chariot races, right to the behind the Coliseum, if you're looking at it, there's this humongous football field, and it was used for chariot races. Now, you think chariot races, you're like, oh, okay, chariot races. But in Ben-Hur, it shows what it really looked like. So a chariot race was often to the death. So all these, you know, wealthy people or drivers that were supported by wealthy merchants or just the wealthy elitists would drive these chariots, and there would be a prize, and it was this huge race. And oftentimes there were knives or different things on the wheels that would knock people over and kill them. A lot of times no one survived these chariot, or very few people would survive because it was deadly. So it shows an actual race, and it's really fantastic. So if you want to watch one of those two movies and write a half a page about it, that definitely could be bonus points. And it's such a good movie. So Cleopatra with Elizabeth Taylor in it. Wow, they spent a ton of ton of money on that movie, and it has some really good historical connections, really does. And Ben-Hur, both the older and the new one, which Ben-Hur I've always loved. And it's funny because just a few years ago I found out my parents got engaged to Ben-Hur, so that's super adorable. So I loved it way before then, but just a great story with lots of historical mentions in it. So thank you so much, and that's chapter 10.